And now let me introduce our presenters today. First, Matt Thompson. Matt Thompson is currently the Executive Director at the Principal Solar Institute. His main career was 23 years in the Semiconductor Process Development and Yield Enhancement Group at Motorola and Freescale Semiconductor. He lives in Austin, Texas. And he received his BS in Physics from Texas Tech University and a PhD in Physics from the University of Texas at Austin. And Dan Bedell is the Senior Director of the Principal Solar Institute. He's also in charge of strategic and corporate development for Principal Solar. Dan and I co-founded Capstone Solar, which was an online community that was a precursor to the Principal Solar Institute, and we joined Principal Solar 2 years ago. He has his BA in economics from the University of North Texas and also spent a semester of study at UK. And so with that, I will turn things over to Matt. So Matt, you can begin.
Thank you, Rick, and good afternoon, everybody. Today, we will talk about the Principal Solar Institute PV Module ratings and how lifetime energy production is used to compare PV modules and their productivity. To do this, first we'll want to talk about the difference between power and energy metrics and why it matters. The Principal Solar Institute PV module ratings are based on a thing we call lifetime energy production. This is a calculated value that is, just as it sounds, related to energy production of PV modules over a 25-year lifetime. So be surprised, I think, to learn that PV modules with the same nameplate wattage can have PSI ratings that differ by at least 60% in some cases. How can this be? We will show some examples and explain this. And what are the PSI ratings of the PV market leaders? So, first, to get started, I want to do a little review with everybody about the differences between power and energy metrics. Remember that power is the rate at which work can be done, while energy is the work that is done during a period of time. Now, I see these two concepts used incorrectly so often in web blogs and in articles that I had to make a couple of slides to discuss that with everybody today because it's a very important difference, and we'll be making a distinction throughout this presentation. So the important metrics in the PV business are price per watt. This is probably the most prevalent metric you hear when you read a web article, a blog, or a journal article. It's really good for use in construction cost estimates, and people who are financing solar projects use this number. The other metric that is related to the Principal Solar Institute PV module rating is the price per kilowatt hour, dollars per kilowatt hour. This is revenue. Revenue is extremely important because it's energy that is sold to consumers, not power. And so I want everybody to keep in mind the difference here between energy and power. So to drive home this point a little bit, I made up a couple of metrics for some popular cars. Remember, the power of a car describes how quickly it can do work, while the energy of a tank of gas describes how far it can go. So look at a Shelby GT500, okay? It has an energy power of 410 kilowatts. Now, in this case, I've converted horsepower to kilowatts. They're both power metrics so that we can get on the same footing for units as we'll be using in the rest of this discussion. So Shelby has 410 kilowatts of engine power, and its tank will hold about 408 kilowatt hours of energy. That's one tank full of gasoline at an equivalent of 400 kilowatt hours of energy. On the other hand, and so you can see the prices per kilowatt, $135 per kilowatt for the Shelby, and it takes 29 cents per kilowatt hour to operate. Now compare this to the Tesla. Model S has a motor power of 310 kilowatts. That's equivalent to 416 horsepower, and it has a battery that holds 85 kilowatt hours of energy. Now look at the cost. It's $300 per kilowatt for power cost, but the energy to operate is only about 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So you can see the metrics are impressively different. And depending on what decision you're trying to make about comparing these two cars, you'll want to choose the appropriate metric. So as I go on to describe how we make our PV module rating, I want to highlight how important efficiency is. Even the most efficient PV modules only convert about 20% of sunlight energy into electricity. So this is a big deal. You know, if you're building a PV utility scale PV array, you know, land costs increase with area. A larger section of land costs more money. If you want to get the most power or the most productivity per acre, for example, you have to understand the efficiency of the PV modules you're going to use. Landowners are smart landowners will be very interested in maximizing the amount of productivity from an acre of land. Rooftop area constrains the energy production for residential solar. So maybe you have a rooftop, you'd like to have 6 kilowatts of power available, but your rooftop is only 1,000 square feet. You may run into trouble. So rooftop area constraints mean that, again, efficiency is important. Then there's a somewhat less direct connection between racking and cabling costs. These costs also increase with area, so module efficiency has a direct impact on the balance of system costs as well. Now, if you look at the traditionally used dollar per watt metric, price per watt, it has nothing to do directly with module efficiency. Sure, more efficient PV modules will cost more generally, but not always. And this is something that is completely left out of the dollar per watt metric. But in our PSI PV module rating, one module characteristic that we use is area efficiency. So we capture the efficiency of the modules in our rating. In addition to area efficiency, we use 7 other essential characteristics that are published in the data sheets for PV modules. These all affect the energy production of a PV module to some extent. The negative power tolerance is the manufacturer's tolerance at meeting the specification of the panel. Some manufacturers say that a panel will deliver plus or minus 3%, for example, of the rated power. Total area efficiency, that's how much of the available sunlight energy is converted into electricity, the percent, that's area efficiency of a module. This is affected by the packing density of the solar cells and the design of the solar cells themselves. So both of these factors combined give us an area efficiency of a module. The low light efficiency is how well PV modules produce in less than standard test conditions. A commonly used metric there is the power generated at 0.2 of the standard test condition, or 200 watts per square meter. We also look at the actual tested power. That means that we don't test the power, but we use tested power values and compare those to what the manufacturers claim their modules will produce. We use the temperature coefficients of the PV modules. When PV modules are in a higher ambient temperature, their efficiency decreases. And so we factor this into the PV module rating as well. We use the nominal operating cell temperature, commonly called NOCT. You know, when PV modules are operating, they generate their own heat, unfortunately, also degrading their efficiency. And then finally, we use what we call the annual power reduction. Now, we don't actually know over the 25-year lifetime how much power reduction will occur. So what we use is the manufacturer's warranty. Most manufacturers will say that their PV modules will produce at least so much power, 80% after 25 years of operation, for example. And so while this may not be a truly measured metric, it is what the manufacturers are willing to stand behind, and I think it's a very good thing to add into our PV module metric. So we take all 7 of these key characteristics and we use them together to calculate the lifetime energy production of each module. Now, how do we do this? Well, to do this, we use a performance model. We have a model that is like the red line in the first graph, showing so much energy available throughout the day. Early in the morning, of course, there's less sunlight available. Somewhere around solar noon, there's the peak, and then it trails off towards the end of the day. And so by using this sunlight distribution combined with the 7 characteristics that I showed on the previous slide, we can calculate the energy being produced with that sunlight distribution over the course of one day. Also during the day, there's going to be a temperature variation. The next slide, the next pane in this slide shows that there's a cycle of highs to low, the highs being in the daytime, the nights being the low, throughout the first week of July. And so we use the temperature data for the parameters in the 7 characteristics that are related to temperatures. With these two things, we can calculate the amount of energy produced per day, per month, per year, and 25 years. So we add up all the energy that a module will produce, calculate to produce, over 25 years, and we call that the lifetime energy production. The next step in our process is we take the lifetime energy production and we divide it by the amount of sunlight that was available over that 25-year period. Now, why is this? You know, you might think, well, if you know the energy produced, why don't you just tell everybody that that's really important? The problem is that, like the green histogram inside the graph, we don't really know in our model how much sunlight energy was actually available. This green histogram shows some clouding, probably in the morning, and maybe some shading in the afternoon. So because we don't really know what the sunlight distribution is going to be in a particular location, we don't want to distract people by saying your PV modules will produce so much energy. So when we normalize this by dividing out by the total energy available in an ideal situation, we can come to a number that 2 PV modules can be compared side by side as if they were both installed at the same angle in the same location, and any kind of background variations in the sunlight intensity of the temperature are in fact normalized out. And so now you can compare with our PV module rating 2 PV modules side by side numerically. Without any further computations or calculations, the numbers that are tabulated and published can be used to compare 2 PV modules. Now, if you visit our website on our ratings page, you'll see some displays of these tables of PV module ratings. The one I'm showing you here in the slide shows a list of about 400 manufacturers and the PV module ratings that we've calculated for each of them. You can see, for example, in the first row, the manufacturer has 16 modules in our database. The maximum has a PV module rating of 8.14 and a minimum of 6.72. So the range of PV module ratings for those 16 modules is from 8.14 to 6.72, and so on through all the nearly 400 PV module manufacturers in our database for a total of around 13,000 PV modules. If you get on our website sometime and click on different manufacturer's name, you can drill down and see the ratings for each individual model number that each manufacturer manufactures. So then you can compare 2 different modules within a manufacturer with our PV module rating, or you can compare between manufacturers and PV modules. You can compare a 300-watt module from manufacturer A with a 280-watt PV module from manufacturer B, and the PV module rating will show you right away which one is more productive. Not necessarily the one that's the best choice, but it is the one that's the most productive in terms of lifetime energy production. So this is not particularly earth-shattering concept that different PV modules are going to produce energy and that they'll produce different amounts of energy. Many of the programs that you can get free online, like NREL's SAM program or PV Watts, will also give you energy production. But because we have this simple rating, we can quickly build some statistics to compare PV modules. For example, This chart here I have graphed as a vertical bar. I've graphed the range of values for each of the 400 manufacturers in our database. So then I sorted that range of values from lowest to highest, with the highest PV module ratings being on the right and the lowest on the left. Now, if you look at Greentech Media's top 5 PV sales rank modules and where they fall in this graph, you can see that for the most part, the market leaders are up there in the highly productive PV modules. This is not surprising because people who are engineering PV systems, in fact, are looking at energy, albeit by more complex engineering tools than PV module rating, and they're coming to the conclusion that, they want these highly efficient and productive modules. The surprising thing is the number 3, the sharp modules, down near the midpoint of the distribution, and I don't know why that is. It's definitely something that is an interesting question and something that we should look at. It could be that there is a tremendously good price performance down there, and despite the fact that they're producing less energy, the price that they can do it for is much less, and so it gets them highly ranked in terms of PV sales. That's just speculation, though. So, with that, I'd like to turn this presentation over to Dan Bedell. He will show you some examples of how the PV module ratings can be used practically to compare different model numbers from different manufacturers.
Thanks, Matt. You guys still have me okay?
Yes, Dan, you sound fine.
All right, great. So let's talk a little bit about how someone might actually apply these ratings in the real world. And in the real world, Principal Solar, who is the lead sponsor of the Principal Solar Institute, does use these ratings. And I want to walk through how we use them. So we recently had a project that we were evaluating for purchase in Southern California. It was a utility scale solar array, ground mount. And I think it was a 10-megawatt project. And these were the manufacturer, or I'm sorry, these are the manufacturers that were spec'd by the developer and were pre-approved by the utility for use on the project. Now, as you can see, luckily, they were, if I can get this to advance, hold on just a moment. There we go. As you can see, they were all roughly the same nameplate power rating. So they were all producing 280 to 290 watts of nameplate power. However, when we applied our rating to them, they were not so much the same. We had a range of close to 6 for that shop module and a high of almost 10 for the Ningbo. So what does that mean for us? Well, this is where it starts to mean something. If we baseline on the shot module, say that is 100% production across the lifetime expectancy of this project, and use that as our baseline, then we can see that, for example, the Centro solar module is going to produce 16% more energy across the lifetime, whereas the Ningbo module is going to produce 62% more energy across its lifetime. Let me extrapolate that out one more here, because if we take the Ningbo as the baseline, we can see that the Trina module is only going to produce 76% of the energy across its lifetime, whereas the shop module is only going to produce 61% of the energy across its lifetime. So this tells us a lot. If we are, like we are, selling power back to the grid at a PPA, we are getting pennies for every kilowatt that we produce. So every kilowatt we produce is effectively the only sellable commodity, meaning that we need to maximize the amount of kilowatts that we're producing. As you can see, if all things were equal, it would make no sense for us to opt for the shop module, where we could produce almost 62% based on lifetime energy production and based on standard test conditions, more power. So let's look at the next slide. What this tells us, it's another way of looking at the same information with the kilowatt hour factor on the right, but not as a percentage, rather as just as a factor. But at the bottom, you note here that the rating being based on 25-year LEP and the relative energy production that calculates for us, The shot would have to be available at 60% of the price of the Ningbo to be cost effective. So remember, the lifetime energy production and the PSI rating is not the only thing that we take into account. It's an important thing, but the price of the module is critically important to the total ROI calculation of any project or any rooftop or residential application. So we need to understand price as one of the critical components in a decision-making process. So we did. And I reached out to our buddy Paula Mintz at SPV Market Research back toward the beginning of this year and had her provide me current global pricing for those modules, and this is what we found at the time. The shot module was not sufficiently cheap. As you can see, there's a pretty tight distribution of pricing at the time across all the modules. So there was no advantage for us to go with the shot module, but there's considerable advantage from a price perspective to look at the SunTech and the Ningbo. So when you start multiplying the pricing times the amount of kilowatts produced in a model, we can determine from an ROI perspective what module makes the most sense economically for us to use based exclusively in this scenario on lifetime energy production that we calculate out of the PSI rating. Now, Matt already mentioned that there are many characteristics that go into a selection process. We have the 7 characteristics of the module itself that goes into the Principal Solar Institute module rating. But we need to understand if the Ningbo is simply not available, if we have a 10 megawatt project and we can only acquire 4 megawatts of Ningbo, for example, within an acceptable time frame, that's not a very viable option for us to pursue. If there's tremendous discounts available for last year's model of something else, that might make it more cost viable. But remember, it's critically important to understand the amount of energy that will be produced across the lifetime of a module. That's why we buy them. So that has to be part of the calculus. And the Principal Solar module rating allows for us to consider lifetime energy production as it should be a critical component of decision-making process. So, Matt, I'm going to turn this back over to you for a summary now that we've given a real-world example of how this can be applied.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. That was good. So in summary, I'd like to drive home exactly what the PSI rating is and what it does. It is an unbiased and calculated number based on published data. So unbiased because the highest number doesn't necessarily mean the manufacturer is the right choice, because the PSI rating is really a tool to use in a cost-benefit analysis. The data is published. We don't actually test the modules ourselves. So it's an unbiased and calculated rating. The rating is proportional to lifetime energy production. This is very important because energy is what we sell in this business, not power. The rating is aware of module efficiency. That is to say, the calculations are a per unit area calculation, not per module, per unit area. The rating is simple with tabulated values. You don't have to go load up a complex program and do an engineering assessment to begin choosing PV modules. Certainly you'll need to do that eventually, but if you have several modules that you would like to compare, the PV module rating will be an excellent screening tool to reduce the field. It's useful for cost-benefit analysis. It's ideal for documenting bids and financial discussions. One of the applications was Solarize Frederick County, Maryland, used our rating in their ROIs for people who are bidding into their Solarize program. This way they could have some sort of an explanation and an example from each of the bids for how the module selection was different and how it might be the best benefit to their program. We also used the PSI PV module rating in due diligence discussions within Principal Solar Incorporated, our primary sponsor, when they are working on an acquisition of a solar project. So there are probably many other uses for the PSI rating that we haven't described today and that we haven't even discovered yet. But we think that the rating will be useful in ways we've outlined and possibly in other ways, and we'd be very interested in hearing from you all to understand what your take is on other applications. So we give the module rating for free on our website. All you have to do is log on and look. Now, we would like everyone to sign up to be members so that they can keep up with updates. We update the PSI module ratings every month. We take out modules that have become obsolete, and we add modules that are new, and we run the models again. So numbers can change monthly. New modules will come and old modules will go. So if you're signed up for our mailing list, you'll find out as we make updates and changes and come visit for the new information. With that, I think we have plenty of time for questions, and so I'll hand it back to Rick.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Dan, if you could advance to the final slide. And for our participants, we do have up to 30 minutes available for questions from our presenters. Please chat your question in the lower right corner and send the chat to all panelists or to all participants if you want to share your question with the entire audience. The first question that has come in was about Dan's comment of all things were equal. So what other factors should you consider when picking a module? And I heard Dan say price and availability. So besides those two things, plus the PSI rating, what other things do you look at when you're considering your modules?
So if I'm considering module selection within Principal Solar, which is out to make profit by selling power, in addition to how much energy is going to be produced and therefore sold, and in addition to the availability of the module itself, we want to consider warranty. Different modules have different warranty, not criteria, but more the profile of the warranties can change a little bit. Certainly we want to get as long a warranty as possible. We want to see if a module is going to be warranted at 80% or 85% of nameplate power production across that entire 25-year period. We want to understand what the terms are for replacement if a module does go out. We want to understand, perhaps most importantly, the financial viability of the parent company. If they're look to be long for this world, or if they're on shaky ground, that might not be a wise choice for us. We want to understand if there can be a wrap program for insurance that incorporates the module itself and the warranty if the parent company does go away. So there are a lot of different considerations. The primary point here is that in module selection, the availability and price of the module is almost always considered, as is the bankability. But what's typically not considered very easily is the amount of energy it will produce across its lifetime outside of the nameplate power rating.
Okay, the next question I think was directed towards Matt. There was a strong emphasis on efficiency. What about situations in wide open spaces where space isn't constrained? Do you still think efficiency is important?
So it may not be quite as important, but I do want to point out that in the wide open spaces, PV modules are often still put very close together. Oftentimes wide open spaces mean utility scale, and there are land costs associated with that. Also cabling. Cabling is actually a fairly major component of the balanced system costs. And so the modules take up more area. You have to run cable longer distance. You need more structures to hold these modules if they're less efficient because, again, the structural mounting is a function of area, increasing with area.
Okay, excellent. The next question that came in from Jules. You mentioned that most modules capture only about 20% of the energy of sunlight. And how do you see that changing over the next few years?
Yes, well, that's a good question. Actually, not most of the modules, but the best modules capture about 20%. There's plenty of modules that don't come even close to that. And so you need to look at that very carefully, and the PSI rating helps you make that assessment. Over the next, foreseeable future, people are working on ways to improve the efficiency of PV modules, but there are physical limits that go back to the way the photoelectric effect works that will keep module efficiency from growing very quickly for a long time. There's some very novel technologies out there that are being experimented in laboratories that may push PV modules up into the 30, 40, maybe even low 50% ranges, but I would say those are very far out, and there's really no way to estimate whether or not they'll ever be economically viable.
Okay, the next question from Don. Does all of the module community recognize the PSI rating?
So the PSI rating is fairly new on the scene, and we don't have any recognition per se formally from module manufacturers. We have spoken with a few of the module manufacturers, and they've looked at our rating system, and some have been pleased and some have been displeased. But at the end of the day, they all had to agree that we had undertaken a scientific approach and that we weren't biased in our approach to some module manufacturer that pleased us.
Next question from Jane Ann. Long-term contract bids do not yet call for the PSI rating, and I would need to show the calculations to show that it's valid. Are the underlying calculations available?
So that's good. We have a white paper on our website that discusses some of the calculations. We will be making a more detailed publication soon that goes into the very specific formulas we've used and the assumptions we've used. But for a first broad brush assessment, you can take a look at our white paper online at principalsolarinstitute.org, white papers tab.
And I'll add to that for Jane Ann or Janine, I'm sorry, I'm not exactly certain how to pronounce that. If there's specific questions about that, our contact information is available with the white papers and on the Principal Solar Institute tab. You might, on the Principal Solar Institute site, you might want to consider sending us specific questions based on what you read in that white paper.
Okay, I think that answers Bill's question also. He would like to see the math where two modules are compared, and could that be included offline or on the website? So Bill, I'll refer you to send an email to Matt Thompson at mt@principalsolar.com.
That's good. I do have a good example that was part of another publication. So if we'll get your email address, I'll send you that slide, and we can discuss the results through the email or on the phone.
Okay, great. Next question from Stephen, and actually let me remind the participants, please do keep those questions coming in. Submit them in the chat in the lower right corner. You can send to all participants if you want to share your question with the entire audience, or send the chat to all panelists if you want to keep your name private. From Stephen, do you ever update your results based on real field data from your arrays under contract? I am thinking of reliability. If some brands or models have higher failure rates or degradation than advertised, do you downgrade the LEP rating?
That's an excellent question. When we launched the idea of lifetime energy production and the PV module rating, we looked at the various factors that would affect the energy production, and reliability definitely came up. We prepared our equations with a reliability term, but we do not have uniform data across very many manufacturers for this reliability factor. And so we would like to be able to use this. We just have not figured out a way to collect meaningful data in terms of reliability. So certainly that would be something that a future version of the PSI rating could take and use.
Next question is from Dawn. Does the type of module differ in the PSI ratings, for example, thin film versus crystalline?
Yes. If you look at the detailed module statistics or the detailed module values, model number by model number, you'll see an identifier whether or not the modules are thin film or crystalline, poly or monocrystalline. So we break that all down in the detailed tables. We do have a web page that also shows separately the top 5% of PV modules broken down into poly, monocrystalline, and thin film.
And I will chat that link out right now to everyone so that they have that comparison of thin film versus crystalline. The next question, again from Stephen. It seems that the most advanced silicon modules, SunPower, IBC, and Panasonic Sanyo HIT cells, they have the highest efficiency but also the lowest T-loss. Thus, they are not only having the highest power per area, but also the highest energy yield, especially in hot climates. And do you have any insight to support this?
Well, so I don't have any detailed insight, but I do know that, of course, the SunPower being highly efficient modules do rank very highly in our PV module rating. And, you know, it's a good observation. I believe that if we looked at it'd be great to maybe engage Stephen in this discussion in email, but I think that if we looked at the temperature coefficients and the operating temperatures, we would see that the characteristics we have in our model SunPower does have superior characteristics in respect of those two metrics.
The next question is from Len. Module output is based on the maximum power point of the IV curve for both the irradiance and temperature conditions that are present. Does your rating take into account the fill factor and how easily the module's maximum power point can be maintained under changing conditions?
So the way that our model gets at that component is through the low light efficiency number. When the manufacturers submit their data, they are required to provide 200 watt per square meter maximum power. And so that's where we get the evaluation of you know, power at maximum power point.
All right, the next question from Doyle. Does latitude or local climate come into consideration? Lower angles, more or less cloudiness?
So it will, because of the fact that the distribution of sunlight is going to be affected through that same parameter I was talking about, the low light efficiency parameter. But because of the normalization we do, I think that we will find that it is still good for side-by-side comparison of PV modules. You know, we do have a program in place where we're developing a regionally specific rating calculation, and the results aren't available yet, but we will be using, you know, the insulation for a zip code, for example, along with the temperature averages for that zip code. And so, you know, this gets a little bit more fine-grained. In reality, I think that the area factor, the area efficiency factor, will override much of the variety, if you will, in the environment. But I'm just speculating that right now, so stay tuned, and hopefully we'll have our regionally specific rating system up and running sometime later this year.
Next question is from Tom. Can you go to the next step and include dollar per watt numbers or ranges for the modules?
Oh, you mean, let me see if I understand that question. You may have to chat back whether or not I've understood your question. But are you saying that could we produce a table showing dollars per kilowatt hour analysis?
And Tom can correct me, but I think he means that can we include the price of the modules in dollars per watt? Could we include that in our calculation or as a table that compares the price of the modules to the PSI?
So we did think about doing that. There are several websites that do purportedly publish dollars for cost of PV modules. The problem that we're going to run into, I think, is that the pricing is often very dependent on quantities and delivery terms, and so these things are in constant flux. The best we could do is maybe, you know, offer a button that would go off to the web and find a range of products like Amazon does when you search for you know, a pencil sharpener, and then you get back a range of costs. So something like that might be possible, but in general, to have a number that's present when you look at a manufacturer's page, I think that you'll still be confounded by the possibility of different pricing and delivery terms.
And I will add to that, based on the analysis that I provided earlier in the webinar, it's not terribly difficult to get average pricing for modules for a manufacturer, a brand, an individual module type at one at a time at a specific point in time. So the numbers that I showed a bit earlier of the 7 or so modules were averages from earlier this year, global averages. However, if you start looking at individual markets, those prices can fluctuate dramatically. In the U.S., where we're looking at tariffs from Chinese imports, the price is going to be higher here for many of those modules than it would be in most other places around the world. At the same time, the price, remember, is determined not exclusively, of course, by the manufacturer, but frequently by the well, not frequently, all the time by the retailer, and by the distance, as Matt already mentioned, the delivery fees. So it is not difficult at all to find an average price of an individual module, or better yet, for any individual user. It is not difficult at all to get actual price quoted to you for an individual module. And you're probably not going to be looking at thousands and thousands at a time. And the goal that you mentioned, which is a great one that we would love to be able to do, would require us to be checking real-time prices for tens of thousands of modules at any given time. Again, that's a great aspirational goal. In the short term, it's very likely that you can get what you're looking for on a very personal basis based on your zip code and suppliers local to you, and do that very easy analysis that I talked about earlier.
And I'll add to that, because I actually, we discussed this a lot when we were creating the PSI ratings, and we felt that we needed to draw a boundary around what it did and what it did not do, and I actually felt like adding cost would take away from the benefit of the ratings. We didn't want it to be a number that just absolutely told you this is better than this for all situations. We wanted it to be a number that had mathematical, unbiased principles behind it, and then would be one of the key considerations. And so we felt that if you added dollars price of the module into the PSI rating number, you're now confusing things. Price can be negotiated. Price can be changed with very quickly with interest rates and with the currency fluctuations and things like that. Same with warranty. Warranties can be sold to a third party that does have good credit terms, better credit terms than the module manufacturer did itself. And deliverability, availability. If we tried to make a single number that included all of those, we would fail. We would be subject to complaints of bias or lack of knowledge. And so we felt that the scientific number that encapsulated everything that was important to us as a long-term seller of energy was this lifetime energy production. And that's why we specifically try to draw the boundary around what we included to exclude numbers like dollars and pricing, and you should definitely consider those on your own as an expert, but I don't see us ever adding that into the PSI rating. With that, I'll take the next question from Darcy. How do you convert a PSI rating to an expected performance? Great question. So I guess they want to denormalize, Matt, from the normalized PSI rating to a performance in kilowatt hours per year.
Well, at this point, you know, I think you're getting to a point to where you need to go ahead and open up an actual engineering tool, because you're going to get a full levelized cost of energy, and you're going to need to understand how the details of the array assembly and inverters play into this. And so I'd say at that point, you use the principal solar rating to find the 10 modules you think might be the best for your project, and then you go get the NREL SAM program and use those modules and do LCOE analysis. At that point, you're going to get into a fairly sophisticated computer model, and you may find that some of the newer modules may not be listed there yet, and so you may run into a few problems doing that. If you do, let me know, and maybe I can get word to them that people are looking for modules they don't have, and we can get an update.
And Darcy, with your follow-up question of how should you value 1 point difference in the PSI ratings, again, by normalizing the PSI ratings, we've made it a comparison tool. So you should value that by comparing two ratings to each other, as Dan did in his example, to determine that one is, say, 60% better than the other.
Right, and by 60% better, it would mean that you're producing 60% more energy per square foot, meter, whatever, than the other.
As the other questions come in, there were some earlier questions that I had skipped over. I'll come back to it. There was a question about the assumptions that you made in the car example, cost of gas and things like that.
Right.
If you wanted to go back to that one.
So okay, that's a very suspicious analogy. There's a lot of room for fluctuation in some of these things. I used $3.45 for gasoline. I used 34 kilowatt hours per gallon of gasoline, and I was careful to say operating costs, so that folds in the miles per gallon. Right. So while a gallon of gas has 34 kilowatt hours, when you run it through an internal combustion engine, you're going to lose 35. You're only going to recover about 35% of the energy, right? And so that factor is obtained through looking at the highway mileage, miles per gallon. I hope that got all the assumptions. There's probably a few others in there.
Okay. Next question that came in reference to Solarize in Frederick County, Maryland. How did they choose to require the PSI ratings, and what exactly are they requiring?
So they, in their request for proposals, they had a statement that was fairly general. It said, provide a PV module energy rating similar to the Principal Solar Institute PV module rating. And I think that somebody who was involved in writing that document understood the value of energy and understood the difference between power and energy, and started doing a web search to find out what energy ratings they could come up with for PV modules. And they came upon our website and decided, hey, this is a quantifiable number that people can find. We'll use that as an example of the kind of rating. So if somebody had found another one, type of energy rating, they could have used it. I don't think they would have found one. We haven't found any others that work in a similar way, that take the factors in and create a simple comparative number to compare PV modules.
I think this might be the last question, but there is time for more if any others come in. And the question was, what is the Principal Solar Institute doing to popularize the PSI ratings?
Well, so we do these kind of outreaches to the solar professionals such as yourselves. We think that the PV module ratings can be used by anybody, from residential consumers to professional developers and designers. And we try to make a reach to those people through LinkedIn group discussions, through personal connections. We also use various other social media approaches. Probably the most effective one we found to date is making connections through the LinkedIn group discussions. So I think the word about the Principal Solar PV module rating is spreading. I'll be giving a poster at PV America in July, and I hope to make a lot of connections there and get some people who will engage me one-on-one and discuss the merits and weaknesses that we may have with this system, because we always want to learn and we want to improve. Remember, we are a solar community. We are developing an industry here, and I think we all need to work together to make industry that is something we can all benefit from and learn from each other.
Okay, another question just came from William. What data does PSI have for how the aging of panels compares to manufacturer predictions? And what is the actual energy production over the long time in years?
So there are, some studies that I've come across out there that are field test studies side by side of various PV modules. And we have looked at these studies. We have not tried to do an in-depth analysis because the studies are sparse and they're difficult to compare from field to field. We see generally good correlation between what we say and in our ratings predict and what they're finding in the field, but until I actually have some statistical significance, I hesitate to release any numbers there.
I'll add to that, Matt, that I know that Dr. Manny Thomasmani from TUV Rheinland and Arizona State University has started some, actually he's not started, he's been doing for a long time some analysis of field conditions and reliability, which is very interesting. I'm not sure how much of that he's published yet. It might be worth searching for. However, one of the problems from our perspective, because what you're suggesting is great information, one of the problems is any study that is undertaken here is obviously done with a limited number of modules and in a limited number of geographies. And certainly it would not apply to all of them. It would be very interesting to add to what we've got, but it wouldn't be a universal metric that could be applied to all modules. So there is data that is being generated out there. I'm not sure about how it's being published yet, but I think that you're very astute to ask that question. It's one that matters a lot.
Another question came in. How are the PSI ratings supported financially? Implications.
So we're funded entirely through sponsorships, through advertising revenue on our website, through sponsored webinars by solar professionals like yourselves, and through the generosity of Principal Solar Incorporated, who is our largest sponsor. They're an independent power producer located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and the world's first distributed utility solar power company.
Okay, excellent.
But it's
go ahead, Dan.
I just want to note it is important to note that we are not funded by any of the module manufacturers, which would call our independence into question. So we work very hard to maintain an independent focus on this.
Okay, well, with that, I'll wrap things up. So Matt, Dan, if you have any parting comments, you can go ahead and let's close out now.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, and I hope you will keep up with the Principal Solar Institute and look for future webinars and share your own experiences with this community of solar professionals.
Yes, I agree. Thank you all very much.